I wore navy, a suit the kind with padded shoulders and soft wool that holds onto the smell of old perfume. I hadn't worn it in years, but something in me knew I'd need it that day, not for grief but armor. We sat in a conference room colder than a morgue, the air too clean, too dead. Carl slouched beside me in Jean's chewing gum. His girlfriend Shannon, a real estate agent with nails like knives, clacked them against her phone screen while pretending not to smirk. The attorney, a thin man with a tie too tight, cleared his throat and said, "We're here for the reading of the will of Mr. Robert T. Wells." My grandfather, the man who raised us. My stomach was tight as piano wire, but I kept still. I'd taken care of Granddad for 27 years. Not because I had to, not even out of guilt. I loved him. I did. Even when his mind started to drift, even when his moods turned sharp, even when Carl reappeared after 10 years to play the role of prodigal son, I was the one who changed his sheets. I was the one who managed the meds, paid the heating bill when his pension didn't stretch. I'd never once thought I wouldn't inherit the house. It wasn't about greed, it was about memory. History. I lived there since I was 12. The attorney began reading. His voice was steady, but each sentence sliced something off me. To my grandson Carl Anthony Wells, I leave the residence located at 912 Cypress Hollow Road, along with all associated property belongings and rights. I stopped breathing. The sound in the room muted like cotton in my ears. Carl chuckled softly, then caught himself. Shannon pressed her hand to her chest in mock surprise, like a bad actress caught off script. "To my granddaughter, Lorraine May Wells." The attorney paused as if he didn't want to say it. I watched the corner of his eye twitch. "I leave the grandfather clock located in the front foyer of the residence. That is all." I didn't speak. My mouth had gone dry. My jaw locked like something frozen into place. I blinked once, then again. The old clock. The one I dusted every Saturday since I was 16. The one that never worked right, whose chimes stopped sometime in the 90s and never came back. The one no one cared about. "That's it," Shannon said before I could. "Just the clock." The attorney cleared his throat again and shuffled the papers. Carl started, but I stood up before he could finish. My legs felt boneless. I took my purse, turned without a word, and walked out of the room. My heels clicked too loudly on the tile, each step echoing like betrayal. Outside, the sun was bright. Stupidly bright. People were laughing somewhere across the street. I wanted to scream. Instead, I walked to my car, opened the door, sat inside, and folded my hands over the steering wheel like I was waiting for permission to cry. But nothing came. No tears. Just this hollow, splintering quiet. That night, Carl texted me. "Hey sis, let me know when you want to pick up your clock." The smiley face felt like a spit in the eye. I stared at the screen. My hand trembled not from sadness, but from something older. Something raw. A kind of abandonment I hadn't felt since I was 5 years old and watched our mother's casket get lowered into the ground. Back then, Granddad had held my hand. He didn't cry. He just looked at the hole in the earth and said, "This world don't owe you a damn thing, Lori. You make your own peace." I thought I had. I really thought I had. The next morning, I drove over to the house. His house now. The gate code had already been changed. I had to ring the bell like a guest. Carl answered in socks, coffee in hand, hair damp from a shower. He was glowing. "Didn't expect you so early," he said, voice fake sweet. I didn't answer. He stepped aside and pointed down the hall. The clock stood where it always had, tall and stiff-backed, bathed in weak morning light. I walked toward it slowly, like approaching an old friend turned stranger. The wood was dustier than I remembered. The brass pendulum had long since stopped moving. I gripped the top edge and wheeled it forward, feeling something shift inside it. A soft thunk. Probably just the weight chains. I didn't care. I wheeled it out alone while Carl watched, sipping his coffee, probably dreaming about new tile for the kitchen. No one said thank you. No one asked if I was okay. I loaded the clock into the back of my car by myself, drove back to my apartment where the walls were thin and the heat came on too loud. I set the clock in the corner and sat beside it, breathing in the scent of its wood lemon polish dust and time. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing the will in my head, over and over. To my granddaughter, I leave the grandfather clock. That is all. It wasn't the clock, not really. It was what the clock meant. You give your life to someone, the best parts, the invisible hours, the quiet care that nobody claps for, and when your hands are finally empty, they hand you a relic, a decoration, a leftover. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not my friend Judy, who would have marched over to Carl's and lit that will on fire. Not the women from book club who thought my life was so serene. I went to work. I made my tea. I read. I sat with that clock every night like it might start talking, like it might give me back something I'd lost. Funny the things you remember, like how Granddad used to keep a peppermint in his pocket for me when I'd wake up from nightmares. Or how he always tapped the side of that clock before leaving the house, like it was some kind of silent promise. Back before supper, he'd say, even after I was grown. I'd forgotten that. Until one night, sitting on my floor in my apartment, I tapped the clock myself. No reason, just memory. Tap. The sound echoed strangely, not against the wood. Behind it. I blinked, leaned in, tapped again. Hollow. I stood up and turned the key to open the lower door. Dust clouded out. It was just the standard pendulum housing, same as always, but something looked off. There was a narrow seam behind the weights, almost invisible, like the wood didn't match. I felt along the edge with my fingertips and found a small indentation. It wasn't a lock. It was just a push panel. A clever one. My heart started pounding. Not like excitement, like a warning. Like the air had gone thinner. I pushed. The panel gave way with a soft pop. Behind it, a cloth bundle. Heavy. I sat back on my heels, stared at it. I didn't touch it right away. I waited. 10 minutes. An hour. I don't know. The room was dark except for the light of the clock face, its old brass hands frozen at 4:46, the moment maybe when everything stopped making sense. Finally, I reached in. The canvas was rough and waxy, folded like something military. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside were 3 bricks each about the size of a paperback novel. My breath hitched. They were dull yellow and cold. Gold. Not jewelry. Not coins. Gold bars. Real ones. With serial numbers and weight stamped into the surface. I touched one and the cold ran through my fingers like ice. I almost laughed. Then I almost screamed. But instead I sat back on the floor and held the bundle like it might vanish. There was a note tucked beneath the canvas. Lori, some things don't go in wills. You showed up. You always did. This is yours. No one else knows. Don't speak of it. Use it if you need it. Don't let guilt dress up like grace. RT. I read it twice, then a third time, and then I cried. Not because I was rich. I didn't even know what gold was worth. I cried because he knew. Because despite the will, despite the cold silence at the end, some part of Granddad remembered the girl who stayed, the woman who kept him warm. The hands that buried his dog held his medicine, cleaned his blood when he fell in the hallway. I leaned against the clock and wept. I was 59 years old and crying like I was 8. It took a week before I could touch the bars again. I called no one. I didn't Google anything. I just sat with them in that quiet apartment listening to the tick of a clock that didn't move. Then one day, I did move. I made a list of everything I'd given up: my own house, my pension, my back after years of lifting him into the tub. I tallied bills, years, hours. Then I hired a lawyer, a different one. A woman named Karen with silver hair and kind eyes who didn't flinch when I told her about the gold. She didn't ask where I got it. She just nodded and said, "We'll get what's yours." I didn't want revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted proof that my years meant something, that my history had weight. The legal steps weren't dramatic. There were quiet filings, private negotiations. Carl never saw me coming, and I never stepped back inside that house. But I started to sleep again. I bought new curtains. I replaced the broken stove burner. I began keeping fresh flowers on my table, something Granddad never allowed because of his allergies. And each time I walked past that clock, I nodded to it, like it was alive. Like it was part of me, now a guardian of what was quietly, finally mine. I started dreaming again. Not nightmares, not memories either. Just spaces. Rooms I'd never been in. Wide windows, soft floors. Sometimes I'd walk through hallways lined with photos I didn't recognize, but I knew they were mine. Versions of me that had never been allowed to exist. A woman in hiking boots. A woman holding a child. A woman alone but glowing. Waking up was the hardest part, because the real world still smelled like loneliness, like last night's leftovers and the lemon cleaner I used to pretend things were fresh. I didn't tell Carl. I didn't owe him that. But I did start keeping a journal. I'd never been a journaling type, always too tired at the end of the day, too focused on everyone else. But now with the clock ticking again, yes, ticking because I had it repaired by a kind old man named George, who cried when he saw it, I felt time differently. I wanted to remember. The first entry was shaky. March 3rd, 6:27 a.m. I opened the curtains today. There's light on the wall I've never noticed. I think I forgot how many hours are in a morning. That same day, I got a call from Carl. He didn't leave a message, just a missed call. But my stomach turned when I saw his name flash across the screen. I let it go to voicemail, and when I finally listened, his voice was strange. No swagger, no smirk. "Hey. Listen. I know we haven't really talked since all that, but I was wondering if you had a minute. Shannon and I are dealing with some stuff here. I thought maybe you could help. No apology, just expectation. Just like when we were kids, when he'd leave the garage in a mess and I'd clean it. When he'd crash the car and I'd lie to Granddad. When he'd disappear for 3 years and then call asking for $500 like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. None of it was. The lawyer Karen had filed something called an estate expense adjustment. She explained that because I'd paid out of pocket for Granddad's care utilities and property maintenance for over a decade, I had a claim, a strong one. Given the size of the estate, she said gently, You could actually place a lien. I didn't know what that meant at first. Then I did. It meant the house wasn't fully Carl's. Not until he paid me what he owed. And the numbers added up thanks to my notebooks. The receipts I'd kept, the ledgers I'd quietly written in every night after Granddad fell asleep. A decade of proof. I hadn't realized I was protecting myself. But I was. When Karen sent the paperwork over for review, I held it in my hands like a holy text. 10 pages. Small print. But every word meant something. I didn't rush to file it. Not out of mercy. Out of mourning. Because once I did, the story between me and Carl would be over. And maybe I wasn't ready yet to admit how little there had ever been between us. We were raised in the same house. We ate the same toast, wore the same hand-me-downs. But he never looked at me like family. More like furniture, something solid, something expected to stay. I sat with that truth for 2 weeks. Then I filed. Carl found out when the letter came to his mailbox. The second voicemail was different. You... Serious, Lorraine. Aline. What the hell is wrong with you? That house was willed to me. You got the damn clock. What more do you want? I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Just silence. I was learning the power of it. Of not explaining myself. A week later, I got another letter. This one handwritten in Carl's messy all-caps print. Lorraine. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I don't deserve this. You're twisting things. Grandpa knew what he was doing. He gave me the house because he trusted me. I've got a baby on the way now. Shannon's pregnant. Be the bigger person like always. Just let it go. See, I stared at the words like always for a long time. Because he was right. I'd always been the bigger person. The quieter one. The fixer. The one who stayed. But not anymore. I didn't reply. Instead, I lit a candle and placed it on the mantel beside the clock. I sat with a cup of tea. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was mine. The next morning, I had a voicemail from Karen. Carl's lawyer reached out. He's willing to settle. Full reimbursement of all your documented expenses. He'd like to avoid court. And just like that, it was done. No apology, no thank you. Just money wired to my account more than I'd ever had in one place at one time. I transferred most of it into savings. Left a little out for something small. Something just for me. I bought a rocking chair. Granddad always said rocking chairs were for people with too much time and not enough work, but I wasn't ashamed anymore of wanting stillness. Every morning after that, I sat in that chair by the window and watched the light change on the clock's face. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting on anyone. Not Granddad, not Carl, not the past. Just the sound of the clock ticking again, and my own breath steady, present. It started small. A box of peaches from the farmer's market. A fresh quilt I found at an estate sale stitched with tiny golden stars. A pair of red leather gloves that made no sense. I didn't need them, but I bought them anyway because they were beautiful and bold, and I realized I'd forgotten how to choose things that weren't practical. The money hadn't changed me. What it did was quieter than change. It removed the noise, the guilt, the second guessing. It gave me back a kind of breath I hadn't taken in 40 years. I didn't tell anyone about the gold. I think that surprises people when I say it now. But that note Granddad left, it felt sacred. And more than that, I understood what he meant when he wrote, "Don't let guilt dress up like grace." He knew me. Knew I'd find a way to excuse it all to say Carl needed it more, or that maybe I didn't want the burden of money. But the truth was I did want it. Not for power, not to punish. I wanted room. To choose. To change. To sit in a rocking chair with a full fridge and a working heater and know no one else could take it from me. Still, there were nights the grief would curl back in like smoke through a vent. I'd catch myself remembering how Granddad's voice sounded when he called me Lori Girl. How his hands trembled those last months, and how he started asking where my mother was like she hadn't died 4 decades earlier, and I'd remember the look in his eyes when Carl came back clean-shaven, talking about new beginnings. He looked relieved. That was the part that still stung. Not that Carl came back, not even that he got the house, but that in those last few months, Granddad had looked at me like someone passing through. Like I was temporary. I didn't want to be bitter. I didn't want to be anything. One day I went down to the storage unit I'd rented after the will was read, a little garage space on the east side of town, where I'd piled all the things I couldn't face throwing away. Boxes of old photo albums, Granddad's fishing rods, Carl's yearbooks. I'd shoved them in without sorting, just dumped history into a metal box and locked the door. I brought coffee with me and a folding chair, told myself I'd start with one box, just one. The third photo I pulled out changed everything. It was me and Granddad sitting on the back porch. I was about 13, my hair in braids. He was showing me how to sand an old wooden stool. His hand was resting on my shoulder, and he was smiling. Not distracted, not weary, smiling like the world was good. On the back in his scrawl he'd written, "Lori sanding the stool says she's gonna own the garage one day." Smart as hell, this one. I sat there in the dust and cried. Not from sadness, from anger, and love, and confusion, and all the things that live inside a daughter when her father figure breaks her heart. Because I knew now that the will wasn't the whole story. I knew that somewhere between the Carl that came back and the Granddad who was fading, something had shifted. Maybe Carl had promised to take care of the place. Maybe Granddad thought I wanted freedom. Or maybe he was just scared, and scared people make cowardly choices. But that photo told the truth. He saw me. He had seen me, even if he forgot near the end, even if the world tried to erase it. I took the photo home, put it in a frame beside the clock. That night I made tea and sat across from both of them. I lit the candle again, and I said out loud, "I forgive you, but I'm not forgetting." The room felt different after that. Still, weighted, and in that stillness something inside me began to settle. Not closure, not peace, but understanding. A few weeks later I got a letter in the mail. It was from Carl, typed. No return address. Lorraine. You got what you wanted. The house is up for sale. Shannon left last month. Took the baby with her. I've got nothing to ask for this time. But I found something in the attic I figured you should have. Enclosed is a copy of a deed signed in 2002. Looks like Granddad had written out a trust that was never filed, had your name on it. I don't know why he changed it. I don't know if it matters. But I figured you should know. Carl, there was a photocopy of the document inside. My name typed in neat letters. Sole beneficiary of the property located at 912 Cypress Hollow Road. Date stamped, but never notarized, never filed. He'd meant to give it to me. Once. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he forgot. Maybe Carl talked him out of it. But once in 2002, my name was there. That was all I needed. I placed the copy in a folder with the rest of the legal documents, not as proof but as testimony of who I'd been, of what I'd given, of what I'd lost. And then I let it sit. I didn't call Carl. I didn't write back. I just sat beside the clock, letting it tick through the silence, minute by minute, into the life that was finally mine. There are things I say out loud now, things I never let myself say when I was still inside it all, the caregiving, the watching, the waiting. I say I was tired. I was angry. I resented him sometimes. I didn't always want to be there. And I say it without shame, because it's true. There's this myth we're handed as women, especially daughters, especially the good ones, that love means silence, that care means self-erasure, that showing up is a quiet kind of nobility no one needs to thank you for, but love without acknowledgement starts to rot. It turns soft in the middle, and that's what happened to me. I didn't stop loving Granddad, but I started disappearing, piece by piece. I didn't realize how much until I walked into that brunch. It was a Sunday. Warm, early spring. I wore those red gloves not because I needed them, but because I decided they were mine. Carl had invited me to the house. For old time's sake, he said, as if we'd shared memories instead of obligations. I said yes, even though I knew better. Sometimes we say yes just to prove we can sit through it and stay whole. The house looked different. The siding was painted some bland beige. The garden was gone. Shannon had put in cement pavers and a stone water feature. The place looked like a rental in disguise. Carl answered the door with that same too-wide grin, but the skin around his eyes was tight. Inside, the air smelled like new carpet and canned air freshener. I sat at the kitchen island, the same one I used to wipe down every night after dinner, the one where I bandaged Granddad's hand when he cut it on a tin of beans. Carl poured coffee into new mugs with gold trim. So he said, "I guess congratulations are in order." I raised an eyebrow. He smirked. "You got what you wanted. The money, the lien, whatever. You always were good with numbers." I didn't answer, because this wasn't a conversation. This was a performance. He talked about the house going on the market, about Shannon moving out, about his new job, some sales gig. I listened, stirred sugar into my coffee, waited. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim folder, set it down between us like a closing statement. He looked at it, frowned. "What's this deed transfer forms?" I said softly. "I've removed the lien, in exchange for a title split." His eyes narrowed. "I'm not interested in splitting." "You don't have to be. It's already filed. But you won't be able to close with the realtor unless I release it. This speeds things up for both of us." He stared at me, waiting for something, a crack in my voice, a plea for peace, an explanation. But I had none to give. I watched his face change, a twitch of his mouth. His shoulders dropped slightly. "You always think you're better than me." "No," I said. "I just stopped letting you decide who I am." Silence. He reached for the folder but didn't open it. I stood, took one last sip of coffee, and set the mug gently in the sink. The dishes were already stacked there, greasy and lazy. The faucet dripped. "I'd like the grandfather clock back," he said as I reached the door. I turned slowly. "You gave it to me. You said you didn't care about it." That was before I knew what was inside. He gave a dry laugh. "Of course there was something inside. That old man never trusted banks. Bet he told you you were special too." I didn't answer. I just looked at him. Not angry. Not broken. Just done. "You don't get the clock," I said. Then I left. The sun outside was warm on my back. A neighbor was watering azaleas down the street. Birds were loud in the trees. It felt like the world had been waiting for me to close that door. And I had. Quietly. Entirely. That night I wound the clock for the first time in years. The new parts ticked perfectly. No delay, no false chimes. Just steady time. I sat beside it and wrote in my journal. April 15th, 11 p.m. Today I returned to the house I spent my life tending, and I left with nothing in my hands. But everything I needed is already here. I didn't know it yet, but that would be the last time I saw Carl. We never spoke again. He sold the house 2 months later. Moved states, I heard. Someone said he went to Texas. I didn't check. I didn't need to. Because what lingered now wasn't his absence, it was my own presence returned to me whole. The kind of presence I used to reserve for everyone else. Now, I gave it to myself. Every morning with coffee and the sound of a clock ticking not forward, not back. Just steady. Here. Now. I didn't think much about the gold after that. Not in the way people expect. I didn't wake up thinking about riches. I didn't spend it wildly or hoard it in fear. I just let it be what it was, an old man's private confession hidden in plain sight. I moved it from the cloth bundle into a safety deposit box. Quietly. No one saw me carry it in. No one knew the branch manager asked inherited, and I simply nodded. She didn't ask more. Sometimes silence tells its own kind of truth. What stayed with me wasn't the gold itself, but the act of hiding it. The decision to put it behind the clock. That meant something. Granddad could have given it to me any time. Could have put it in his will. Could have told me with his mouth in one of those moments between pills and supper and the slow unraveling of his memory, but he didn't. He made me find it. And I wondered if that was his apology, his version of one anyway. A man who didn't say sorry, didn't explain, who taught lessons through omission, who believed in hard work and harder truths. Maybe he wanted me to go looking, to open the thing no one else thought to touch. Maybe he thought I'd need to feel the loss before I could own the gift. I don't know. I'll never know. But some mornings when the light hits the clock just right, I imagine him standing behind it, arms crossed, watching, saying nothing, just waiting for me to see what he always meant. It's strange what we inherit. Sometimes it's houses, sometimes it's habits, sometimes it's silence carried for so long you start mistaking it for your own voice. But now I hear mine more clearly. It started the day I visited the garage again. Not Granddad's that had been sold off years ago, but a different one. Smaller. Run by a woman named Carla, who reminded me of myself at 25. Grease on her hands, binder under one arm, phone tucked between her shoulder and cheek. I had stopped in for an oil change. She glanced at my car, asked what year it was, then smiled. "She's old," I said, "but she runs." "So are the best ones," Carla replied. I waited in the little office with its plastic chairs and old magazines, but my eyes kept drifting to the corner, to the corkboard with the schedule pinned up, the pencil marks, the laminated calendar with birthdays circled. It looked familiar. Not because I'd seen it before, but because I'd lived that life once. Early mornings, stained coffee cups, the smell of rubber and steel. After my car was done, I lingered. I don't know why. Carla handed me my keys and said, "You know we could use someone like you part-time. You seem like you know your way around." I must have looked surprised because she laughed. "I saw you staring at the spark plug display like it owed you money. That's not normal." I smiled, really smiled, maybe for the first time in months. I didn't say yes. Not right away, but that night I sat at the kitchen table with the old ledger I'd once used to track Granddad's invoices. It still smelled like pencil lead and motor oil. I flipped through the pages, running my hand over the names of customers who'd probably long since passed Mrs. Hamlin with her Buick John K. and his temperamental Ford. And I thought, maybe I'm not done yet. Maybe I never was. The next week I went back. 2 days a week turned into 3. I didn't lift engines my back wouldn't allow it, but I kept books, ordered parts, took calls, taught Carla how to do payroll without cursing at the screen, and I felt useful, not needed, not depended on, not trapped. Useful. It's a quiet kind of joy. One afternoon, I brought in a framed photo, the one of me and Granddad on the porch sanding the stool. I placed it on the shelf above the desk. Carla looked at it and said, "That your dad?" "Something like that," I replied. She didn't ask more. People like us women who've worked with our hands, held lives together with twine and good intentions, we don't need every detail to feel the truth. We just know. That night I walked home. Not drove, walked. The sun was low. Golden hour, the photographers call it. It painted the sidewalk in long, gentle shadows, and I passed a little antique shop I'd never noticed before. Inside, against the back wall, I saw a clock. Not like mine, simpler, smaller. A mantel clock with a face like a whisper. I walked in, ran my fingers over the wood. "It's temperamental," the shop owner warned. "Chimes when it wants to. We can't seem to fix it." I smiled. "I don't want it to be fixed," I said. I bought it. Set it on the mantel in my bedroom beside a sprig of dried lavender and the small ceramic angel my mother once gave me before the fire, before everything. Now when I sleep, I hear 2 clocks ticking. Out of sync. But alive. Like me. The second clock didn't chime for the first 3 nights. I almost returned it. Something inside me still wanted things to behave, to follow rules, to be predictable and clean. But then on the 4th night, I woke up to a soft chime at exactly 3 horrors a.m. Not loud, not airy, just a single, almost reluctant note like it had finally decided to speak. I sat up in bed and looked across the room. The moonlight was catching on the glass, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw movement. A figure. A man. But not like a ghost, like memory itself, was sitting in my chair watching me sleep. And I didn't feel afraid. I just whispered, "It's okay. You can go now." The room stayed still, but the silence felt warmer somehow. Not hollow. When I told Carla about it, she gave a half smile and said, "You talk to furniture. That's how I know you're one of us." I didn't tell her what the chime meant to me, or how for so many years I'd been the one who didn't make noise, the one who didn't ask for more, the one who loved quietly and hoped someone would notice. But I noticed now, and that was enough. One day at the garage, while Carla was out picking up parts, a woman came in with a busted muffler and a baby on her hip. She looked 22 at most, with shadows under her eyes and shoes too thin for the weather. Her name was Kendra. The baby Ellie had mismatched socks and a toy missing its head. I offered her a seat in the office and poured her a cup of instant coffee. She drank it like it was a miracle. "They said the estimate was gonna be 500, she said, her voice shaking. "I don't have 500. I looked at the form. It wasn't 500. It was 350, but someone at the front desk had clearly exaggerated, maybe to push her toward a payment plan. I shook my head and rewrote it in pen. $3.50, and if you need time, we'll work something out." Her eyes welled. Why, I wanted to say something simple like, "Because we help people," or "It's just the right thing." But instead I said, "Because someone once taught me what it means to show up." She didn't understand. She didn't need to. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table and reread the note Granddad had left inside the clock. For who showed up? That was the line that stuck. Not the gold. Not the secrecy. That sentence. Because showing up is the hardest thing. It's what people forget to see. They praise bravery when it's loud, when it marches, when it breaks things, when it demands the microphone. But there's another kind. The kind that wipes mouths and lifts bodies and writes down blood pressure numbers in notebooks. The kind that waits for the chime even when it doesn't come. I remembered all the times I'd shown up. When Carl overdosed and I called the ambulance. When Granddad wet the couch and cried and I said, "It's okay, we'll get you cleaned up." When Shannon told me I was selfish for not giving up my half of the estate, and I stood there without flinching. I remembered holding Granddad's hand in the hospital the night before he died. His eyes were glazed, his mouth dry. He looked at me and whispered, "Don't forget the clock." I thought he meant time, but now I wonder if he meant exactly what he said. Don't forget the clock. Don't forget what's hidden in plain sight. The next morning, I made a list. Not of chores or groceries or bills. I'd done that kind of list my whole life. This one was different. It said, sand the stool, plant tomatoes in May, try the pottery class on 3rd Street, find a red dress, drive to the ocean, laugh more, cry when I need to, write it all down. It was the first time in years I'd written something for the me I was becoming, not the one I'd been expected to stay. That afternoon, I found the old stool in the storage unit. Still half-sanded, uneven legs, a wobble that made it impossible to sit on. I brought it home and started again this time, not to make it perfect, but to finish what I started. My hands are slower now. The joints ache in the mornings. But when I run the sandpaper across the grain, I feel 13 again. Back on the porch, Granddad's voice saying, "There's no shortcut to smooth. No shortcut to healing either. It's the same motion, over and over, until the roughness turns to something gentle." That night I placed the stool by the mantel beside the ticking clock. I didn't need to sit on it. It was enough just to see it there whole. The next day I wore the red gloves again, even though it was too warm. I liked the way they made me feel like a woman who'd chosen something for no reason but joy. A girl at the bus stop looked at them and said, "Those are pretty." I smiled and said, "They are, aren't they? Because sometimes it's okay to say something is beautiful, even when no one else agrees, even when it took a lifetime to believe it." And as the bus pulled up, I saw my reflection in the glass. Not just older, wiser. Not just alone, complete. I hadn't been to the ocean in over 20 years. Not since a weekend trip with Granddad back in the early 90s when gas was cheap and he had a wild hair about getting out of town. We drove his old Lincoln the whole way down to Gulf Shores. He wore sandals with socks, and I wore a dress I hated, but he insisted made me look respectable. The water was cold, the sand too soft. But we laughed. I remember he bought me a funnel cake, and we ate it in the car with powdered sugar all over our laps. I hadn't thought about that in years. Not until I wrote Drive to the Ocean on that list, and it pulled something loose in me. So I did it. Packed a tote bag, filled a thermos with coffee, left a note for Carla saying I'd be back in a week maybe. She texted back a thumbs up, and you deserve it. I got in my car and drove south. No itinerary, no reservations. Just me and a radio that still played static when I hit the wrong hills. I stopped overnight in a town where no one knew me. Stayed at a roadside inn with orange doors and a view of the Waffle House. And I felt fine. Not nervous, not self-conscious. Just fine. The next day I reached the water. It was early evening when I parked along the coast. No crowds, no boardwalks. Just a long stretch of wet sand and a few gulls spiraling low. I took off my shoes and walked until my toes met the tide. And then I stood there. Let the salt touch my skin. Let the sky open. I must have stood there an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't talk to anyone. But something inside me loosened like a knot I'd carried for so long I forgot it was there. I picked up a shell, just one small and cracked, slipped it into my coat pocket. That night, I found a tiny diner that served fried catfish and hush puppies, and I sat in a booth by the window watching the sun go down behind a rusted pier. An older couple sat behind me talking about grandkids and mortgage payments. The waitress called everyone hon. I fit in without needing to fit in. When I got back to my motel, I placed the shell on the nightstand beside the Gideon Bible and the little plastic cup holding 2 wrapped mints. And I whispered, "You did good, Lori." It was the first time I said it to myself without hearing someone else's voice in my head doubting it. No corrections, no deflections, just truth. The next morning I wrote in my journal May 7th, 6:50 a.m. The ocean doesn't ask who you were before you arrived. It just holds you. For a moment, I belonged to myself completely. I think that's all I've ever wanted. On the drive back, I didn't listen to the radio. I let the quiet be music. The sun shifted through the windows, and I watched the trees blur past in greens and golds. I stopped for pie at a gas station diner, spoke to no one but the cashier, and I felt steady. That was the word that kept coming back, steady, not happy, not healed, not triumphant, just steady. At home, the clocks greeted me, both ticking, one in the living room, one in the bedroom. I checked the stool still solid, still holding, and I placed the ocean shell beside the red gloves on the mantel, a small offering to no one but me. A week later, Carla handed me a plain white envelope that had been dropped off by a courier. No return address. Inside was a single-page letter, typed. Lorraine. I sold the house. Moved out west. I'm not great at saying things face to face. I found one more thing in the crawl space wrapped in a quilt way in the back. Thought you should have it. I'm sending it by separate mail. No tricks, no strings, just maybe he meant it for you. Take care, Carl. I waited 2 days. On the 3rd, a second package arrived. Heavy, about the size of a shoebox. Inside was an old photo album, covered in dust, pages yellowed. The first picture was of my mother holding Carl as a baby. The second was me barely 4 in overalls with one ponytail too low and dirt on my cheeks. Granddad's hand was holding mine. The third was the garage back when the sign still said, Wells and Daughters. I'd forgotten that. He had painted it that way when I turned 16. I didn't think he meant it. I thought it was a joke. But it was there. Clear as day. Wells and Daughters, Family Automotive. I ran my hand across the picture and whispered, You remembered. Because maybe he'd forgotten a lot near the end. Maybe he'd let Carl back in too easily. But somewhere, some part of him had always seen me. Maybe not with words. Maybe not in ways I could hold at the time. But it was there. The album smelled like the garage. Oil and old paper. I placed it on the table, opened it all the way, and let myself look. Not just at the photos, but at the girl I'd been. The woman I became. And I whispered, "I see you now." The picture stayed open for days. I couldn't bring myself to close it. Every time I passed the table, I'd pause, run my fingers over the edges. That one photo, Wells and Daughters, became a kind of proof. A time-stamped ink and paper admission that I had at some point been enough. That the name wasn't just for show. That I wasn't just a stand-in until Carl came back. He painted that sign for me. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he let it peel and fade in the years after. But once, even just once, he looked at me and saw legacy. I took the photo out of the album and placed it in a new frame beside the stool and the clock. A little altar, I guess. Not to him, to memory, to the life I almost didn't know I had. That night I lit a candle and just sat. Didn't write, didn't read, just sat and listened to the tick of the clock and my own breath in the stillness. The next day, I cleaned the apartment from top to bottom. Not because it was dirty, it wasn't, but because something inside me needed the space to match how I felt claimed, uncluttered, whole. I scrubbed corners I'd ignored, reorganized drawers, tossed out clothes I'd kept just in case but hadn't worn in years. In the back of my closet, I found a sweater of Granddad's, wool, navy, worn at the elbows. I held it for a long time. It didn't smell like him anymore. It smelled like time. I folded it, placed it gently into a box, and taped it shut. Not as erasure, as reverence. Later, I visited the local thrift store and donated the box along with a few others. The woman behind the counter was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with eyes that had seen their share of disappointment but still softened when she smiled. "This is nice stuff," she said, running her hand over the wool. "It belonged to someone who mattered," I told her. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. On the way home, I passed a small storefront with a sign that read, "Art for All, community classes every Sunday." There was a flyer taped to the glass pottery, "Beginners welcome." It was on the list. So I walked in. The woman at the front desk was named Joy. I thought that was funny, her name matching the thing I'd spent so long trying to find. She handed me a clipboard and said, "First class is free. You ready to get messy?" I laughed. I've been messy. I'm just ready for it to mean something. She didn't flinch, just handed me an apron and pointed toward the back. The studio smelled like clay and kiln heat. Soft music played from a speaker tucked behind a stack of glaze jars. There were a few others, 2 older women, a teenager with chipped nail polish, a man with kind eyes and a missing finger. We sat at wheels and learned how to center the clay. "You gotta feel the weight," Joy said, hands guiding mine. "Let it wobble. Don't fight it. Just press steady." The first time I tried, the clay collapsed. The second time it cracked. The third time something held. A small bowl. Crooked. Too thick on one side. But mine. I ran my thumb along the rim and felt a pride that had nothing to do with perfection. It was the pride of beginning again, of choosing to learn, to fail, to stay. When I got home, I wrote in my journal, May 20th, 8:16 p.m. My hands know more than I thought. Clay listens. It doesn't ask me to explain. It just waits. Like time. Like forgiveness. Like me. That night I slept with the windows open. The clocks ticked together in rhythm. Even the second one, the moody little mantel clock, chimed at midnight as if to say, "I'm still here." In the dream, I was back in the garage, but not as a girl, as I am now. Older, softer, wiser. Granddad was there sanding something I couldn't see. He looked up, smiled, and said, "Took you long enough." I walked over, leaned beside him, and said I had to go find myself first. He nodded. "That's the job." Then he handed me the sandpaper. I woke up before I saw what we were working on. Didn't matter. I carried the feeling into the day like a blessing, because now I wake up knowing I'm not waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for a recognition that may never come, not for someone to hand me the life I was always capable of shaping. I already have it, and I'm shaping it now. One bowl, one page, one tick of the clock at a time. It's strange how quickly life rearranges itself once you start saying yes to it. Not the big cinematic kind of yes, not the kind with music swelling in the background or some neat little ribbon at the end. Just small ones, the quiet kind. The kind that sneak up on you when you're tying your shoes or paying for peaches. I said yes to the pottery class. Yes to Carla asking me to come in for one more day a week. Yes to Judy inviting me to her backyard fire pit, even though I almost said no out of habit. And most of all, I said yes to myself. To that part of me I'd left in the shadows for years, the girl who used to sing with the radio, who once wrote poems in the margins of engine manuals, who used to walk barefoot through the garage just to feel the concrete cool against her skin. She came back. Little by little, she came home. One afternoon, I was sitting outside on the stoop of my building drinking coffee from a chipped mug and listening to the breeze rustle through the maple trees overhead. A young man from the second floor, quiet, polite, always nods in the hallway, stopped on his way out. "Excuse me," he said, holding a small package. "This was in my mailbox, but it's addressed to you. I think the numbers got mixed up." He handed it to me. A plain brown box. "No return address." I thanked him and brought it inside. It was small but heavier than it looked. When I opened it, I found two things, a folded piece of legal stationery and a brass key. The note was short, typed, no signature. "Thought you might want this?" Found it taped inside the top drawer of Granddad's old desk. "No idea what it opens?" "Maybe you do." I held the key for a long time, brass slightly tarnished, worn smooth at the top, a number etched along the shaft, 1742. I tried to think. Drawer shed storage. Then I remembered something, a conversation from years ago, maybe 10, maybe 15. Granddad had been watching the news and some story about theft came on. He scoffed and muttered, "That's why I keep my lockbox where no one'll find it." I asked what lockbox. He didn't answer, just gave a small smile and said, "Old habits die hard, Lori girl." I never asked again. Now I was thinking maybe the clock wasn't the only thing he left behind. I went to the garage. Not the one Carla owned, the old garage. The original Wells and Daughters, which was now a discount furniture warehouse. But the property next to it still had a rusted-out tool shed padlocked and forgotten. I hadn't been there since before Granddad died. I parked out front and walked around the back, trying not to look suspicious. The shed was still there, covered in ivy and dead leaves, the door barely hanging on its hinges. I brushed off the lock. The number was the same, 1742. My breath caught. The key slid in smooth. Click. Inside it smelled like mold and old rain. Most of the shelves were empty, but in the far back corner, hidden beneath a tarp, was a small gray box. Fireproof. Heavy. I lifted it and felt something shift inside. Carried it to the car without opening it. My hands were shaking too badly. Back home, I set it on the kitchen table, lit a candle and sat in front of it like it was an altar. Then I opened it. Inside were documents. Some legal, some personal, some strange. There were receipts dating back to the 70s, photocopies of birth certificates, a small velvet pouch containing what I assumed were old coins. A photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, Granddad's sister maybe, but tucked beneath it all was a letter. Handwritten. Folded into thirds. The paper was yellowed. The ink faded, but the handwriting was his. Lori girl. If you're reading this, I guess I didn't get around to telling you everything I should have. There's no excuse for that. Only the truth. I spent my whole life holding things in. I thought that made me strong. I didn't want to be one of those men who fell apart when things got hard, so I just didn't let myself feel too much. But you made that hard. You were always the one who felt everything. Who stayed. Who kept the lights on when everything else was falling apart. I don't know why I let Carl back in the way I did. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear. Maybe I thought I had to give him something so I wouldn't feel like I failed twice. But I see now, I failed you in the process. That house should have gone to you. That trust document, I wrote it. I meant it. But I let someone talk me out of filing it. Someone who said you were strong enough not to need it. That was the worst kind of cowardice, dressing abandonment up like faith. The gold was a small way to make up for it, not because money makes things right, but because I wanted you to have something that no one could take. Something that said, I saw you. Not just for what you did, but for who you were. If I'm gone, I hope you're okay. I hope the clocks still work. I hope you found your own time. RT. I didn't cry right away. I folded the letter back up, placed it gently in the velvet pouch, and stared at the flame on the candle until it flickered and died. Then I laid my head on the table and sobbed. Not from pain, from something deeper. Something like release. Because he knew. Maybe not in time. Maybe not when I needed it most, but he knew. And somehow he found a way to tell me. I didn't tell anyone about the letter, not Carla, not Judy, not the women from book club who still asked about the clock situation with half-curious, half-sensational smiles. I kept it to myself. Some truths don't need an audience. I placed it in the drawer of my nightstand beside the little ocean shell and the small, uneven bowl from my first pottery class. I knew the moment I folded that paper that I was folding something else too, the version of my life that had waited for someone else to name it. He saw me. That was enough. But being seen isn't the same as being saved. You still have to do the work of living. And living at this stage feels less like a march and more like a waltz, one step forward, one back, than a turn you weren't expecting. Sometimes I lead, sometimes time does. I got back to the studio the next day and found Carla holding court over 3 new interns. She looked up, saw me, and smirked. "You're late." I held up a bag of donuts. "I come bearing peace." She rolled her eyes and waved me through. Later, while the others were on break, she leaned against the edge of the workbench and asked, "You ever think about starting your own thing?" I looked up from the invoices. "What kind of thing? You've got the books, the experience, the name." She tapped the framed photo of the Wells and Daughters sign I'd brought in a week ago. "Why not resurrect it?" I laughed too sharp at first, then softer. "That place is long gone. Buildings, maybe. Not the soul of it." She was serious. I'd never thought about it. Or maybe I had and shoved it down like so many other dreams, the way I used to imagine opening a flower shop, or taking a train across the country, or falling in love with someone kind who didn't need fixing. Start small, she said. Pop-up table, mobile oil changes, teach girls how to change tires. Something simple, something yours. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want it, but because something inside me sparked and I wasn't sure I was ready to hold that fire. That night, I pulled out my old ledger again. It had grease stains and a corner chewed by time, but the pages still held my handwriting, still bore the marks of a life lived with intention even when it didn't feel that way. I flipped to the back, tore out a fresh sheet and wrote, Wells and Daughters, revival below it a list. Basic car care classes, Saturdays, partner with local high school, outreach, mobile garage idea, scholarship fund, call Karen about setup. Name a tool after Granddad just for me. The next day I called Karen. Tell me what I'd need, I said, to start something small, but real. She didn't hesitate. How real? As real as the clocks. I could hear her smile over the line. The steps were simple but serious. Register the business file, the paperwork, set up a small trust. I had enough saved. I didn't need investors or partners, just faith in my own name. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of the clerk's office with the signed forms in my hand. Wells and Daughters, LLC. It felt strange. Official. Mine. After I dropped off the paperwork, I walked home and stopped by the antique shop where I'd bought the second clock. The owner, a tall man with round glasses and a bow tie, recognized me immediately. The chime lady, he said. Guilty. He laughed. It's still behaving. Only when it feels like it. He pointed to a new clock on the shelf behind him. Sleek modern silver with a glass face. Very precise. German made. Sings every hour like it's paid to. I shook my head. Too perfect. He leaned in slightly. It's the imperfect ones that last. The ones that have been repaired. They learn how to keep going. I left without buying anything, but I carried those words with me. It's the imperfect ones that last. That night, I worked late on the couch, drawing up simple flyers for the new classes, scribbling taglines I'd never use, laughing at how ridiculous some of them sounded. Car trouble, ask the daughters. From our hands to yours, grace, grease, and gumption. Eventually, I settled on one that felt right. Show up. Learn. Leave stronger. Because that's what it had always been about. Not engines, not clocks, not gold, but showing up, being seen, becoming something solid after years of holding everyone else. I printed one copy and pinned it to the fridge, and then for the first time since Granddad passed, I slept through the night without waking once. No dreams, just peace. The morning of my first class, I burned the eggs. Not because I was nervous. Not exactly. I was just distracted. The kind of distraction that comes with a quiet thrill, like the moment before a storm you're actually looking forward to. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the toaster, waiting for the bread to pop, and let the smell of scorched yolk fill the room. And I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was real. I scraped the pan clean, made new eggs, and ate in silence, just me and the ticking clock and the early light slipping between the blinds. Then I got dressed. Simple jeans, work boots, the same faded navy button-down Granddad used to wear, pressed and tucked like a second skin. I pinned a small silver brooch to the collar, a tiny wrench I'd found at a craft fair. It felt like armor. The first student arrived early, 16 years old, Name was Raina. Wore combat boots and a permanent scowl. Her mother dropped her off, then peeled out of the parking lot before the girl even shut the door. "Mom says I gotta learn how to fix my own car," she mumbled. I smiled and handed her a donut. Everyone starts somewhere. By 10 o'clock, we had 9 girls, all ages, all shapes and skin and scars. They sat on folding chairs in the corner of Carla's garage, sipping lemonade and squinting at my old whiteboard like it was a magic mirror. I taught them how to check oil, how to change a tire, how to spot a scam on an invoice. But more than that, I taught them what no one had taught me, that their hands belonged here, that their bodies weren't foreign in this space, that the garage was not a kingdom but a table and everyone deserved a seat. At the end of class, Raina lingered. She picked up a socket wrench, turned it in her fingers, then looked at me. "Did you always know how to do this?" "No," I said, "but I always knew I could learn." She nodded once. Just once. Then walked out with her chin a little higher. I watched her go, then turned off the lights. The smell of rubber and grit filled the air, the familiar scent of who I used to be. But now it didn't weigh me down. It held me up. That evening, I came home and found a small envelope taped to my door. No return address, just my name, Lori. Inside, a single note. Folded, typed. "Didn't expect you to do all this. Guess you got more of him than I did. I don't hate you. Carl." I stood in the hallway, note in hand, the hallway light buzzing above me, and I felt nothing. No surge of relief, no fresh wound. Just the quiet weight of what no longer needed to be carried. I slipped the note into the back of my journal. Didn't write anything about it. Didn't need to. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always a decision. Sometimes it's just the moment you stop bleeding from a wound that's already closed. Later that night, I lit the candle, sat by the clock, and wound it. I don't do it every night, but when I do, it feels like a prayer. Not to him, to me. To the woman who stayed, who left, who came back. To the girl who sanded a stool and thought one day she'd run the whole place. She didn't. She built her own. That's the difference. The next morning, I opened the front door and found sunlight waiting for me like an old friend. The breeze smelled like lilacs. The day didn't ask for anything. It just welcomed me. And I walked into it whole. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.